It's hard to imagine a reverb being functional when the tails can be 3 or 5 or 6 or 10 seconds long, and you're only resampling content that's a second long.
If you think about it, I mean, you're resampling, or not but you're recirculating,
Okay.
I should say, through and through and through, and you know, it works fine. But the problem is that it's twofold. One is that every time it recirculates around a 1 second loop in memory, it gets degraded that much more as it gets knocked down in amplitude. It gets very small. And the other problem is that it continuously goes through these mechanisms that are designed to create more echoes every time it goes through the loop, which gets you to this white noise sound that, you know, most textbook reverbs try to go for. And that's what gets you to that blurriness. You know, people will say, can you get, you know, something that kind of blurs that sound? And after about an hour, they start to see how clarity in reverb can be very, very useful, because now it's possible to use more reverb, to use it in bolder ways without adding to a muddiness and just an overall masking or obscuring of the performance itself. So a lot of times you'll have lots of modern music today will have very long reverbs on many different elements of the mix. You know, certainly not in pop or something, but in some other forms. And as you start piling these reverbs together, pretty soon this white noise and this blurring, which are really two separate issues, start to sort of take over the sound. And so there's a limit. Somebody says, oh, you've got too much reverb. Well, with the Bricasti, you don't really ever reach a point where you say there's too much reverb because it's masking something. You say, well, aesthetically, I'd like less reverb there. You know, another thing, again, listening to real performances in real spaces, there just is this belief that, well, you can only hear the direction of the source for just a very few milliseconds, and then it goes away, and that's just simply not true. And in order for a reverb to actually maintain the soundstage and to create something that sounds very real, you need to move towards this idea of true stereo, where you've got individual reverbs that are really looking out for the different, okay, I've got a sound here and it needs to reverberate over here at a certain period of time, and vice versa. So, you know, in reality, at all times, every individual reverb within an M10 really consists of 10 separate reverbs running all the time. So what you hear as one reverb is really 10 different reverbs looking out over different aspects of the space, of the soundstage, and allowing for the soundstage to be preserved in what I feel is a much more realistic way. So again, traditional reverbs will maintain the sort of the left-right image for just a very short period of time, you know, 100 or 200 milliseconds of time. And after that, it just becomes the stereo that you hear is generated from the reverb itself. There's no longer any relationship to what's actually happened in the room.
Right.
Whereas with the Bricasti, that is preserved throughout the duration of the reverb, and I think makes a world of difference. Personally.
I guess we're starting to get a sense for why this kind of a reverb couldn't be recreated in a plug-in or a plug-in card. I mean, first you're telling me that you're I guess recycling material 30 or 60 seconds long, and in addition to that we have 10 separate reverbs moving simultaneously and interacting with one another.
It goes back to our original design principle, and that was to design something very specifically geared towards doing one thing very well. And I mean, you can lay on top of that the not only just the ease of use, which it has. We've tried to minimize the controls, make great presets so you don't really have to do a lot of tweaking if you don't want to. They get you right there, and to get those sounds very, very quickly. But because of the fact that it takes a lot of processing to get that done, and that's just a disadvantage that we have right now relative to every other reverb manufacturer on the planet, is that we went out and tried to build something that would do a very particular thing, and it just doesn't lend itself. And this is coming from an ex-CPU memory controller designer for Hewlett-Packard. I mean, I worked on a lot of very interesting things relating to this in the CPU world, and my preference has always been to try to do things more in native, what you would call native now, but in my old days, I would stand up and say, you don't need to build specialized hardware. I can, if you let me do some work in these chips, in your CPU, I can, make sure that we can do this in software if we just add this little bit of sort of DSP capability inside your CPU. And I did that for years and years and years at Hewlett-Packard, and it was sort of the beginning of a lot of what you now see as Altavec, and then onto what they have in the Intel processors as these specialized DSP products. So I really don't want to say, no Luddite in that regard, but taking all of the knowledge that I had also meant that I had to face reality that there are limitations, and they're not just in the compute resources, which there are 12 600 megahertz DSPs cranking away for every reverb here in the M7, but the memory structures themselves are incredibly important. And so if you look, even the very best architectures today that are just general purpose processors, they're based on levels of cache and so forth, and this algorithm would just eat those up for lunch. What happens is in a general purpose processor, you've got, this isn't going to be as technical as it sounds, I'll relate it to something more real, but in a general purpose processor, things get chunked together in blocks. And so that these blocks are brought up sort of this ladder to slow memory, to faster memory, to faster, to faster. So you've got all these levels of, we know it as cache, but by the time you get to the processor register set, it's very, very, very fast. But these blocks are convenient for some types of processing, but for reverb, you really need to have access to something more than fixed blocks. It would be like saying, well, here we're sitting in a nice studio room, how much the camera, could see this, but it would be as though you say, well, in a studio or a live room, control room, I have to have everything based on 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot cubes, and there can't be anything that would not be, based on that. So you would have obviously lots of standing reflections and things that you wouldn't want.